The summer of 2024 was unlike any other. The sun beat down with a vengeance, turning cities into furnaces. From the concrete jungles of New York to the ancient ruins of Rome, temperatures soared to unprecedented heights. Heat waves rolled across continents, their fiery breath scorching the earth. Forests ignited, turning into infernos that raged for weeks. Rivers and reservoirs dwindled, their lifeblood evaporating under the relentless sun. The air grew heavy, thick with smoke and despair. People gasped for breath, seeking refuge in the shadows. Air conditioners struggled to keep pace, their hum a constant reminder of the oppressive heat. Hospitals overflowed, their corridors filled with the victims of heat stroke and dehydration. The world was on fire, and the flames were licking at everyone's door. The elderly and the very young were the most vulnerable, their frail bodies unable to withstand the onslaught. Farmers watched helplessly as their crops withered and died, their livelihoods turning to dust beneath their feet. Animals sought shelter in vain, their once lush habitats transformed into barren wastelands. The earth was sending a message, a desperate plea for help. Far away in the icy realms of the Arctic and Antarctic, another disaster was unfolding. The polar ice caps, once vast and impenetrable, were melting at an alarming rate. Glaciers, those ancient rivers of ice, were crumbling and collapsing into the sea. The frozen north was weeping, its tears adding to the rising tides. Coastal communities watched in fear as the seas encroached upon their homes and livelihoods. Island nations, their very existence threatened by the rising waters, issued desperate calls for help. The Maldives, Tuvalu, Kiribati, these names, once synonymous with paradise, became synonymous with impending doom. The delicate balance of the planet's ecosystems was thrown into disarray. Coral reefs, those vibrant underwater cities, bleached and died as ocean temperatures soared. Marine life struggled to adapt, their migration patterns disrupted, their food sources dwindling. The oceans, once teeming with life, were becoming increasingly hostile. Amidst the chaos and despair, a glimmer of hope emerged. Around the world, people were waking up to the reality of the climate crisis. They saw the scorching heat, the melting ice, the rising seas, and they knew that something had to be done. A new generation, raised on the front lines of a changing planet, was ready to fight for its future. From the ashes of a burning world, a movement was born. Young people, armed with the power of their convictions and the reach of social media, began to organize. They shared their stories, their fears, and their hopes for a better future. They marched in the streets, demanding action from their leaders. They were the Green Guardians, and they were determined to make a difference.
The summer of 2024 was a turning point for me. The relentless heat, the choking air, the water shortages, they were no longer abstract concepts discussed in hushed tones. They were my reality, a constant, terrifying presence that seeped into every aspect of my life. I watched as my city, once a symbol of resilience and hope, struggled under the weight of an environmental crisis spiraling out of control. The news offered no escape, only a steady stream of grim reminders of the planet's plight. Images of raging wildfires in California, devastating floods in Bangladesh, and ice shelves crumbling into the ocean filled me with a sense of dread. The world, it seemed, was unraveling, and I felt powerless to stop it. But amidst the despair, a flicker of hope emerged. I stumbled upon a documentary about Greta Thunberg, the young Swedish activist who had ignited a global movement for climate action. Greta's unwavering conviction, her refusal to be silenced, resonated deeply with me. I saw in Greta a reflection of my own growing anger and frustration, a shared sense of urgency that transcended borders and cultures. Inspired by Greta's courage, I devoured every article and video I could find about climate change. I joined online forums, connecting with other young people around the world who shared my concerns. I learned about the science behind climate change, the devastating impacts it was already having, and the urgent need for action. The more I learned, the more determined I became to act. I realized that I wasn't alone in my fear and anger. Millions of young people around the world were waking up to the climate crisis, ready to fight for their future. And I, Laila Patel, a 17-year-old girl from New Delhi, wanted to be a part of that fight. A newfound fire ignited within me, a burning desire to transform my fear and helplessness into action. I knew I couldn't single-handedly reverse the damage already done, but I could no longer remain a passive observer. The stories of Greta and countless other young activists had shown me that age was no barrier when it came to demanding change. I started small. I began by making changes in my own life, adopting a more sustainable lifestyle. I convinced my family to reduce their energy consumption, to switch to reusable bags and water bottles, and to embrace a more plant-based diet. I organized cleanup drives in my neighborhood, picking up plastic waste and raising awareness about the importance of recycling. But I knew that individual actions, while important, were not enough. I needed to find a way to amplify my voice, to connect with others who shared my passion and my urgency. I spent hours brainstorming ideas, scribbling down thoughts in my notebook, my mind buzzing with possibilities. One evening, while browsing through social media, an idea struck me. I had always been tech-savvy, comfortable navigating the digital world. What if I could harness the power of the internet to create a platform, a virtual meeting place for young climate activists around the world, a place where they could connect, share ideas, and mobilize for action? The seed of an idea, once planted, quickly took root in my mind. I envisioned a digital space that transcended geographical boundaries, a platform where young people could unite under a common goal to fight for climate justice. I knew that the internet, with its vast reach and ability to connect people across continents, could be a powerful tool for change. I spent days researching website design, learning the basics of coding, and reaching out to friends with technical expertise. I wanted the platform to be visually appealing, user-friendly, and most importantly, to reflect the urgency of the climate crisis. I wanted it to be a beacon of hope, a rallying cry for a generation that refused to inherit a broken planet. After weeks of tireless effort, fueled by countless cups of chai and sleepless nights, greenguardians.org was born. The website, a vibrant tapestry of green and blue, featured a world map dotted with stories of young climate activists from across the globe. It provided a platform for sharing information, organizing events, and connecting with like-minded individuals. I launched the website with a heartfelt message, a call to action that echoed the growing anxieties of a generation. "We are the Green Guardians," I wrote, "and we refuse to be silenced. The Earth is our home, and it's time we fight for it." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within days, messages of support poured in from every corner of the globe. Young people, united by a shared sense of urgency and a desire for change, flocked to greenguardians.org. The website became a virtual meeting place, a digital town square where young activists from diverse backgrounds and cultures found their voice, sharing their stories, their fears, and their hopes for a better future.
The acrid smell of smoke hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of the inferno that had swept through Napa Valley. Generations of love, sweat, and dedication had gone up in flames, consumed by a wildfire fueled by drought and a warming climate. The once lush rows of grapevines, heavy with the promise of a bountiful harvest, were now charred and lifeless, their twisted forms reaching towards the sky like silent pleas for help. The air, thick with the smell of ash and despair, was difficult to breathe. He picked up a charred piece of wood, the remnants of a vine that had been in his family for as long as he could remember. It crumbled in his hands, turning to dust like the dreams he had nurtured since childhood. He had always envisioned taking over the vineyard, continuing the legacy his ancestors had painstakingly built. But now, staring at the devastation around him, he felt a profound sense of uncertainty. The wildfire had been the worst in California's history, fueled by an unprecedented drought and record-breaking temperatures. Climate change, once a distant threat discussed in hushed tones, had become a terrifying reality, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. Ethan had seen the warning signs, had heard the pleas of scientists and activists, but nothing had prepared him for the gut-wrenching feeling of loss he experienced standing amidst the ruins of his family's livelihood. But amidst the despair, a spark of defiance ignited within him. He refused to let this tragedy break him. He refused to let his family's legacy end in ashes. He vowed to honor their memory by fighting for a future where such devastation would become a relic of the past. He would become a guardian of the earth, a voice for the voiceless, a warrior against the forces that threatened to consume his world.
Thousands of miles away, In the heart of the Amazon rainforest, Maria Silva, a 20-year-old indigenous activist, watched in despair as swathes of lush greenery gave way to barren scars on the earth. The air, usually alive with the cacophony of the rainforest, was thick with the stench of freshly cut timber and the ominous silence of a dying ecosystem. Illegal loggers, emboldened by lax environmental regulations and driven by greed, were decimating her ancestral home, leaving behind a trail of destruction that threatened the delicate balance of the planet. Maria had grown up listening to the stories of her elders, tales that spoke of the forest as a sacred being, a source of life and wisdom. She had learned to navigate the intricate web of life that thrived beneath the rainforest canopy, to respect the interconnectedness of all living things. The forest was not just her home, it was her family, her teacher, her protector. Seeing it ravaged by greed filled her with a rage that ran as deep as the roots of the ancient trees that were being felled around her. The illegal logging was not just an attack on her community's way of life, it was a crime against the entire planet. The Amazon rainforest, often referred to as the lungs of the earth, played a crucial role in regulating the global climate, absorbing vast amounts of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Its destruction would have catastrophic consequences, accelerating climate change and unleashing a cascade of environmental disasters that would be felt across the globe. Maria refused to stand by and watch as her heritage, her future, went up in flames. She had witnessed the devastating impacts of deforestation firsthand, the loss of biodiversity, the displacement of indigenous communities, the increase in droughts and wildfires. She knew that the time for complacency was over, that the fate of the Amazon and indeed the planet rested on the shoulders of her generation. Inspired by the stories of indigenous resistance that had been passed down through generations, Maria resolved to become a fierce protector of her ancestral home. She organized protests, rallied her community, and reached out to international organizations, determined to draw attention to the plight of the Amazon and the indigenous communities who were on the front lines of the fight against deforestation. She knew that the battle to save the rainforest was a battle for the future, a battle for the very survival of humanity.
Laila Patel's creation, greenguardians.org, quickly blossomed into a digital sanctuary for a generation grappling with the harsh realities of a changing climate. News of the platform spread like wildfire across social media, carried by a collective yearning for change and a refusal to be silenced. Young people, united by a shared sense of urgency and a desire for a livable future, flocked to the website, their voices adding to a chorus of dissent that echoed across continents. Ethan Parker, still reeling from the loss of his family's vineyard, stumbled upon greenguardians.org during a late-night search for information about climate change. The website, with its vibrant imagery and stories of young activists from around the world, ignited a spark of hope within him. He realized that he was not alone in his grief and anger, that there were others out there who understood his pain and shared his desire for a better future. Maria Silva, deep in the heart of the Amazon, found solace in the digital embrace of greenguardians.org. The website provided her with a platform to share her story, to connect with a global network of activists who were fighting for climate justice. She realized that the battle to save the Amazon was not just a local struggle, but a global movement, fueled by the collective will of a generation that refused to inherit a broken planet. As more young people joined the Green Guardians, the movement gained momentum, transforming from a digital gathering place into a force to be reckoned with. Laila, Ethan, and Maria, once strangers united by a shared sense of purpose, found themselves at the forefront of a global youth movement that was demanding action on climate change. They organized protests, launched online campaigns, and lobbied their governments, their voices growing louder with each passing day. The Green Guardians were not just fighting for their future, they were fighting for the future of the planet. They were the voice of a generation that was tired of empty promises and inaction. They were the hope of a world teetering on the brink of environmental catastrophe, and they were just getting started. The Green Guardians' message resonated like a clarion call across the digital landscape. Young people, armed with smartphones and a burning desire for change, became the movement's most powerful weapon. Social media platforms, once dominated by selfies and viral trends, transformed into virtual battlegrounds for climate justice. Hashtags like #GreenGuardians, #ClimateStrike, and #OurFuture, became rallying cries, amplifying the movement's message and mobilizing a generation to action. Lila, Ethan, and Maria, the movement's emerging leaders, found themselves thrust into the spotlight. Their personal stories, amplified by the internet's global reach, resonated with millions of young people who saw their own fears and aspirations reflected in the Green Guardians' message. They used their newfound platforms to share information, debunk climate change denial, and inspire others to join the fight for their future. The internet became a breeding ground for creativity and innovation as young activists around the world developed new and engaging ways to spread awareness about the climate crisis. Online petitions garnered millions of signatures, virtual climate marches drew participants from every corner of the globe, and educational campaigns, tailored for a digital audience, debunked myths and highlighted the urgency of the situation. The Green Guardians, once a disparate group of individuals united by a common goal, had tapped into the power of the digital age, transforming themselves into a global force for change. Their message, carried on the waves of the internet, was reaching every corner of the planet, igniting a firestorm of activism that threatened to consume the complacency of the past and usher in a new era of climate consciousness. The Green Guardians' digital activism soon spilled over into the real world as young people, emboldened by their online connections and fueled by a growing sense of urgency, took to the streets to demand action on climate change. From the bustling streets of New Delhi to the concrete jungles of New York City, from the heart of the Amazon rainforest to the steps of government buildings around the world, a generation rose up, their voices echoing with a shared demand for a livable future. Lila as Lila Patel. In my hometown of New Delhi, I organized a march that drew hundreds of thousands of participants. Our voices echoed through the city's crowded streets, demanding that the Indian government take concrete steps to address the country's crippling air pollution and invest in renewable energy. The march, a vibrant tapestry of colorful banners, passionate speeches, and traditional music, captured the world's attention, showcasing the growing strength of the climate justice movement in the developing world. Ethan, as Ethan Parker, drawing on my connections in the American heartland, I organized a series of rallies and demonstrations across the United States. We targeted the fossil fuel industry and demanded a just transition to a clean energy economy. Farmers, students, teachers, and indigenous activists joined forces, our voices uniting in a chorus of dissent that stretched from the rolling hills of Iowa to the bustling metropolises of the East Coast. As Maria Silva, deep in the Amazon, I mobilized my community and other indigenous groups to defend our ancestral lands from the encroaching threat of deforestation. We organized blockades, staged protests at government offices, and reached out to international media, determined to shine a light on the environmental destruction that was threatening our way of life and the health of the planet. The culmination of the Green Guardians' digital and on-the-ground activism was a global climate strike, a day of action designed to send a powerful message to world leaders that the time for empty promises and inaction was over. On September 27, 2024, millions of people around the world, inspired by the Green Guardians' call to action, walked out of their schools, workplaces and homes, uniting in a historic display of solidarity for climate justice. The strike, coordinated across time zones and continents, began in the Pacific Islands, where communities on the front lines of rising sea levels marched with a sense of urgency, their voices amplified by the fear of losing their homes and cultures. The wave of activism then swept across Asia, with massive strikes taking place in India, Bangladesh and China, where young people, choked by air pollution and facing an uncertain future, demanded action from their leaders. As the day progressed, the strike moved across Europe, with millions of people pouring into the streets of London, Paris, Berlin and Rome, demanding that their governments take concrete steps to reduce carbon emissions and transition to renewable energy. The air buzzed with a sense of hope and determination as students, teachers, parents and grandparents marched side by side, united by a shared desire for a livable planet. Finally, the strike reached the Americas, where massive demonstrations took place in cities across the United States, Canada, and Latin America. From the steps of the US Capitol building to the streets of Rio de Janeiro, the message was clear. The youth of the world were no longer willing to be ignored, and they were demanding action on climate change now. Section 4, a force to be reckoned with. The global climate strike was a watershed moment in the fight for climate justice. It demonstrated the power of collective action, the ability of young people to transcend borders and cultures to unite under a common cause. The Green Guardians, once a small group of individuals with a dream, had become a global movement, a force to be reckoned with on the world stage. The world watched in awe as millions of people marched for their future, their voices echoing with a sense of urgency and resolve that could no longer be ignored. Politicians, CEOs, and world leaders, accustomed to dictating the terms of the debate, were forced to listen as a new generation demanded a seat at the table, ready to inherit the mantle of leadership and chart a course towards a sustainable future. The global climate strike was not the end of the fight for climate justice. It was just the beginning. The Green Guardians, emboldened by their success and fueled by the support of millions around the world, knew that their work was far from over. They had tasted the power of collective action, and they were determined to use it to hold those in power accountable for their inaction and to build a better future for themselves and generations to come. The world had been put on notice. The Green Guardians had arrived, and they were not going away. The United Nations Climate Summit in New York City was abuzz with activity. World leaders, dignitaries, and environmental experts from across the globe had gathered to discuss the pressing issue of climate change. Inside the Grand Hall, speeches were being delivered, negotiations were taking place, and promises were being made. Outside, however, a different kind of gathering was taking shape. Thousands of Green Guardians, their numbers swelled by supporters from environmental organizations, indigenous communities, and concerned citizens, had descended upon the UN headquarters. The air buzzed with a nervous energy, a potent mix of anticipation and apprehension. The Green Guardians had a plan, a daring act of digital defiance that they hoped would shake the foundations of the summit and capture the world's attention. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the city, a hush fell over the crowd. Lila, Ethan, and Maria, their faces illuminated by the glow of a nearby screen, stood on a makeshift platform, their eyes fixed on the live feed of the summit being projected onto a large screen behind them. The moment they had been waiting for had arrived.
With a few deft keystrokes, a team of young hackers, working in secrecy from a location unknown to all but a select few, infiltrated the UN's secure network. The live feed of the summit flickered momentarily before being replaced by the Green Guardians logo, a vibrant green seedling emerging from a cracked earth, a symbol of hope and resilience in the face of adversity.
A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as the Green Guardians' message flashed across screens around the world. The summit was under siege, not by violence or force, but by the power of digital disruption. The world watched in stunned silence as the Green Guardians' message, a pre-recorded video, began to play on screens inside the UN headquarters and in living rooms across the globe. Gone were the polished speeches and diplomatic platitudes that had come to define such gatherings. In their place were the raw, unfiltered voices of those on the front lines of the climate crisis. The video opened with a montage of images that showcased the devastating impacts of climate change: flooded villages in Bangladesh, parched fields in Ethiopia, raging wildfires in Australia, and melting glaciers in Greenland. The images were accompanied by a soundtrack of haunting music and the voices of people from around the world speaking in their native languages, sharing their stories of loss, displacement, and fear.
We are the Green Guardians, and we are here to tell you that our planet is in peril. The climate crisis is not a future threat. It is happening now, and it is affecting all of us, but especially the most vulnerable among us.
We have been failed by our leaders, by their inaction, their greed, and their short-sightedness. They have chosen profit over people, destruction over sustainability, and now we are all paying the price.
The earth is not ours to exploit. It is a sacred gift, and we have a responsibility to protect it for future generations.
Section 3. A Promise for the Future. The Green Guardian's video lasted just over 7 minutes, but its impact was seismic. For the first time, world leaders were forced to confront the human cost of their inaction, to look into the eyes of those whose lives were being upended by the climate crisis. The carefully constructed facade of diplomacy crumbled, replaced by a raw, visceral understanding of the urgency of the situation. Inside the UN headquarters, the atmosphere was electric. Delegates, visibly shaken by what they had just witnessed, whispered amongst themselves, their faces etched with a mix of concern and apprehension. The carefully choreographed speeches and diplomatic pronouncements suddenly seemed woefully inadequate in the face of the raw emotion and undeniable urgency of the Green Guardian's message. The world watched and waited, holding its breath, uncertain of what would happen next. Would this act of digital defiance be dismissed as a youthful prank, easily brushed aside by those in power, or would it prove to be the catalyst for real, meaningful change? The Green Guardians, their hearts pounding in their chests, hoped and prayed that it would be the latter. As the video ended, the screen faded to black and a single message, emblazoned in bold green letters, filled the screen. The future is now. Act like it. The message, simple yet powerful, hung in the air, a challenge to world leaders and a rallying cry for a generation demanding a livable future. The Green Guardians had made their point, the world was listening. The question now was, would anyone act? Section 1. A new era of accountability. The Green Guardian's audacious act of digital defiance at the UN Climate Summit had sent shockwaves through the corridors of power. The world was watching, and the pressure on leaders to act on climate change had never been greater. The summit, initially marred by diplomatic maneuvering and watered-down commitments, took on a renewed sense of urgency. Negotiations, once stalled, resumed with a fervor, fueled by the realization that the eyes of the world, particularly those of the younger generation, were upon them. Lila, Ethan, Maria, and their fellow Green Guardians, though physically absent from the summit's negotiating tables, were ever present in the minds of those shaping the future of the planet. Their message, broadcast globally, had shifted the narrative, injecting a sense of moral responsibility into what had become a cynical exercise in political posturing. The question was no longer whether to act, but how to act and how quickly. The Green Guardians, however, were not content to rest on their laurels. They knew that promises made under pressure could easily be broken once the spotlight faded. They remained vigilant, leveraging their digital platforms to hold governments and corporations accountable for their commitments. They tracked environmental policies, exposed greenwashing tactics, and mobilized their followers to apply pressure where it mattered most. The movement, which had begun as a desperate plea for action, had evolved into a powerful force for accountability. The Green Guardians, with their unwavering commitment to a livable future, had become the world's conscience, reminding those in power that the time for complacency was over. The fight for climate justice had entered a new era, one where the voices of the young and the vulnerable could no longer be ignored. Section 2. Seeds of Change. While the battle for systemic change raged on, the Green Guardians understood that real transformation began at the grassroots level. They launched a series of initiatives aimed at empowering individuals and communities to adopt sustainable practices and become agents of change in their own right. Their digital platforms, once primarily focused on raising awareness and mobilizing protests, transformed into hubs of information, education, and inspiration. Lila, drawing on her tech savvy and her deep understanding of the power of storytelling, spearheaded the development of an online platform that provided practical tips and resources for sustainable living. The platform featured articles on reducing carbon footprints, DIY guides for upcycling and repurposing everyday items, and recipes for plant-based meals. It also served as a space for sharing success stories, fostering a sense of community and empowering individuals to embrace a more sustainable lifestyle. Ethan, leveraging his background in agriculture, launched a series of workshops and online courses that taught sustainable farming practices. He traveled to communities impacted by climate change, sharing his knowledge and expertise with farmers struggling to adapt to changing weather patterns and degraded soil conditions. His efforts helped to build resilience in the face of climate challenges, empowering communities to become stewards of their land and resources. Maria, deeply connected to her indigenous roots, worked tirelessly to preserve and promote traditional ecological knowledge. She partnered with elders and knowledge keepers to document ancient practices of sustainable living, from seed saving and agroforestry to water conservation and natural resource management. She shared this knowledge through workshops, online platforms, and cultural exchange programs, ensuring that the wisdom of generations past would continue to guide the path towards a sustainable future. Section 3. Guardians of a Greener Tomorrow. The seeds of change planted by the Green Guardians began to take root and flourish in communities around the world. From urban gardens sprouting in concrete jungles to renewable energy projects powering remote villages, a global movement towards sustainability was gaining momentum. The Green Guardians, once a beacon of hope in a world teetering on the brink of despair, were now witnessing the tangible results of their efforts. Governments, spurred by the Green Guardians' relentless advocacy and the growing public demand for action, began to implement policies aimed at curbing carbon emissions, investing in renewable energy, and protecting natural resources. While progress was often slow and met with resistance from entrenched interests, the tide seemed to be turning. The Green Guardians, through their unwavering dedication and strategic activism, had shifted the political landscape, making it clear that inaction on climate change was no longer an option. Corporations, facing pressure from consumers and investors increasingly concerned about environmental and social responsibility, began to adopt more sustainable practices. Green technologies, once considered niche or cost prohibitive, became mainstream, driven by innovation and the growing demand for eco-friendly products and services. The Green Guardians, through their savvy use of social media and consumer activism, had helped to create a market for sustainability, proving that economic prosperity and environmental stewardship were not mutually exclusive. The world was changing, slowly but surely, and the Green Guardians, their hearts filled with a cautious optimism, continued their work, knowing that the fight for climate justice was far from over. They had inherited a planet in peril, but they refused to succumb to despair. They were the Green Guardians, and they were determined to be the generation that turned the tide, that restored balance to the earth, and that secured a livable future for generations to come.
Years turned into decades, seasons changing with a newfound gentleness. The earth, battered but not broken, began to heal. The Green Guardians, their youthful fire tempered by experience and wisdom, continued their work, their paths diverging yet forever intertwined by the shared purpose that had brought them together.
Lila, her name synonymous with the digital revolution that had shaken the world awake, became a renowned environmental scientist. Her research focused on developing sustainable technologies and mitigating the impacts of climate change, earned her global acclaim and prestigious awards. Yet she never forgot the lessons learned during those early days of greenguardians.org, often sharing her story with young activists, reminding them of the power of collective action and the importance of holding on to hope, even in the face of daunting challenges.
Ethan, his hands calloused but his spirit unbroken, returned to his roots, transforming the charred remains of his family's vineyard into a model of sustainable agriculture. His farm, powered by renewable energy and employing regenerative farming practices, became a beacon of hope for a struggling agricultural industry grappling with the impacts of climate change. He traveled the world, sharing his knowledge and experience, empowering farmers to become stewards of their land and ensuring food security for generations to come.
Maria, her voice echoing with the wisdom of her ancestors, became a global advocate for indigenous rights and environmental justice. She traveled to remote corners of the world, amplifying the voices of marginalized communities on the front lines of climate change and fighting for the protection of their lands and cultures. She reminded the world that true sustainability could only be achieved by honoring the interconnectedness of all living things and by respecting the traditional knowledge of those who had lived in harmony with nature for millennia.
Section 2. A Legacy Etched in Green. The legacy of the Green Guardians extended far beyond the individual achievements of its founding members. The movement they had sparked, born out of a shared sense of urgency and a refusal to be silenced, had taken root, growing into a global force for change that transcended generations. The global climate strike, once a radical act of defiance, became an annual event, a day of solidarity and a powerful reminder that the fight for a livable planet was far from over. Millions of people inspired by the Green Guardians' courage and determination continued to take to the streets, demanding action on climate change and holding those in power accountable for their promises. The Green Guardians' digital legacy lived on, their website evolving into a vast repository of information, resources and success stories. The platform, translated into dozens of languages, became a vital tool for educators, activists and policymakers around the world, providing them with the knowledge and tools they needed to build a more sustainable future. The Green Guardians' message, once dismissed by some as youthful idealism, had become mainstream. Governments, corporations and individuals alike were finally waking up to the reality of the climate crisis and the urgent need for action. The world was changing, slowly but surely, and the Green Guardians, their hearts filled with a cautious optimism, knew that their efforts had not been in vain. Section 3. The Earth Remembers. The Earth, a silent witness to the struggles and triumphs of humankind, began to show signs of recovery. The air, once heavy with pollution, grew cleaner, the skies a brighter blue. Forests, once decimated by wildfires and deforestation, slowly began to regenerate, their verdant canopies offering shelter to a resurgent web of life. Rivers, once choked with industrial waste, flowed freely once more, their waters teeming with fish and other aquatic creatures. The Earth remembers those who have fought to protect her, those who have listened to her whispers and heeded her warnings. She remembers the Green Guardians, the young people who dared to challenge the status quo, who raised their voices in unison and who demanded a better future for themselves and for generations to come. Their legacy is etched into her very being, a testament to the power of hope, courage and collective action. The fight for climate justice, however, is far from over. The challenges ahead remain daunting, requiring continued vigilance, innovation and unwavering commitment. But the Green Guardians have shown the world that change is possible, that even in the darkest of times, hope can ignite a movement, and that the power of collective action can move mountains, or in this case, heal a planet. The Earth remembers, and so do we.